What's the most important art supply that you need to think about when you're first starting with pastels? The most common question from beginner pastelists that I see is, which pastels should I buy? But that's not the most important question to answer. It's not the most important art supply when it comes to pastel painting. So what is the most important art supply? Let's talk about that. I recently made another video about building your painting, which is a simple process for putting together a pastel painting. You should go watch that if you haven't already. But in that video, I created a painting and I only used watercolor for the underpainting, which I didn't have to do. I could have just used pastels. And I only used NuPastel pastel sticks, which are a relatively inexpensive, harder pastel. And I only used a few colors. You can produce a beautiful piece of artwork with honestly cheaper pastels. But when it comes to creating great artwork, you can't make a good piece of art if you don't have the right surface. And so today, that's what we're going to review. Now, when it comes to trying to find the right surface to paint on, this can be really frustrating, especially when you're starting out, because there really are so many options out there. I mean, these are all options used by professional painters. So how do you choose the right one? Well, that's what this video is about. I want to show you in detail some of these surfaces that are available, what the characteristics are, what they're like, so you can choose the right one for you. And of course, reviewing all of these different surfaces could get expensive. So later in the video, I'm going to give you a tip about how to do that much more inexpensively. All right, so let's get started. First, we're going to review some unsanded papers. Now, many pastel surfaces out there are sanded, and for a reason, because sanded surfaces, like the sandpaper you buy at your hardware store, it has a texture that's rough and has grooves and divots in it that will accept the pastel dust and hold on to it. And that's what you want. You want to be able to put multiple layers. You want to be able to put your pastel dust on the paper and have it stick and hang on. And so sanded surfaces are really good for that. But there are other options as well that are unsanded that could also produce some interesting results. Now, choosing the paper, whether it's unsanded or sanded, really comes down to the style of artwork you want to produce. Are you going for a realism, fine detail? Then you're going to want a smoother surface. But are you going for impressionism, abstraction, a rougher, rugged landscape? Then you're going to want more texture. Maybe a sanded paper is a better option there. So as we review these surfaces, make sure you keep in mind what style of artwork do I want to produce, and these reviews will help you to choose the right one. So first up on our unsanded list is Rives BFK. This is a printmaking paper, but it's also used by artists in many different mediums: watercolor, acrylic, and of course pastels. It's 100% cotton, and it's known for its consistency. It has a nice rustic texture that could give you that classic pastel look, but some realism artists like Brian Bailey use it as well. Rives BFK comes in 5 neutral colors: white, cream, gray, tan, and black. And I really want to explore this paper here pretty soon. Next up, we have Fabriano Cromia. This paper is designed to replicate the characteristics of handmade paper. It has a bit more texture and is a little stiffer than the Rives BFK. And that's mainly because it's only 50% cotton, and it also works well with wet and dry mediums like Rives does, and that includes paints and pastels. And both this and Rives BFK come with some deckled, torn edges, which could produce a more handcrafted feel in your art, depending on how you frame your artwork. Next, we have Canson Mi-Teintes. This is the regular Mi-Teintes. There's also Mi-Teintes Touch, which is sanded. There are 50 different colors to choose from in this paper. Now, color to me is not as important because you can always tone or color any of these papers with acrylic paint or watercolor paint, inks. There's a variety of methods you can use to get the paper the color that you want, or create an underpainting that's the color that you want. The texture and stiffness falls somewhere in between the Rives BFK and the Fabriano. Next up, we have Velour by Hannemuhle. This is an interesting surface. It's used a lot by pet portrait artists because the soft, velvety surface can really lend well to the furs and hairs that you find in pets. But it can also produce a soft, dreamlike look in your paintings. So a lot of pastel artists use this for that dreamlike feel or for realism. It accepts the pastel well, but really is a different surface that you really just have to try to get. This brand of velour is available in 10 different colors. And then we have Clairfontaine Pastelmat. This is probably the most popular and most multi-purpose pastel surface out there. Many professional artists use it, from landscape painters to portrait artists, impressionists, abstract artists, realists. And the surface is unsanded and it's smooth and very consistent. It has a slight velvety texture, not like velour. The pastel mat holds up well to moisture, so a wet underpainting like an alcohol wash or watercolor would work fine. Pastel mat comes in 16 different colors, including white. Hey, if this review is helpful for you, please consider liking this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you know when a new video comes out. Now let's get back to the paper review. Now let's review the most popular sanded surfaces out there for pastel painters. And again, these are great if you want to produce texture, that classic textured look of pastel. When you drag your pastel across the surface, you want that mottled, gritty, textury look. That's what these surfaces are made for, and they're wonderful. The first of our sanded surfaces is Canson Mi-Teintes Touch. So we looked at the Canson Mi-Teintes earlier, which is just a plain paper. This is a paper with a sanded surface, but it almost doesn't feel sanded. It's very smooth, though not velvety like velour and pastel mat. It's available in 10 different neutral colors. It can accept wet underpainting, and it produces a really interesting texture, but it doesn't feel like it accepts the pastel as easily as other brands of sanded paper, but it is used by professional pastelists such as Lorenzo Chavez. This is UART Spectrum Colourfix, and it's very similar to Canson Mi-Teintes Touch, but a bit grittier. It also accepts wet underpainting as well. Colourfix comes in 20 different colors and 3 different grits: smooth, medium, which I believe is 400 grit, and rough. And interestingly, UART Spectrum also sells primers at these same grit levels and the same colors, so that you could touch up your paper if you make a mistake, or even make your own surfaces with the primer. Now this is the bonus that I've thrown in. This is the only one that's not a paper base. This is a hardboard surface called Ampersand Pastelbord. And it's a 1/8 inch thick masonite hardboard as the base with a sanded primer on top. And I inserted it here in the review because it's most similar to the other 2 sanded surfaces we've seen so far, the Mi-Teintes Touch and the Colourfix. The grittiness of the texture is somewhere between the 2, and it's finished with marble dust, which is interesting. It comes in 4 colors: white, a sage green, tan, and gray. Now this is the first commercial product that was specifically developed for pastel painting, and it's called Sennelier La Carte. Sennelier is known for their high quality soft pastels as well, a brand you should look at when you do get ready to buy some pastels. Now this surface has a gritty texture and it feels very similar to hardware store sandpaper, but not as abrasive because the texture comes from vegetable fibers. But when you touch it, you can feel some of the grit coming off. I don't know what to think about that. I haven't used it enough to know how that affects your painting. Now this one is Pastel Premier. It's another paper I would like to experiment with at some point. It has more grit than the other sanded papers we have covered so far, and is similar in texture to the next 3 on our list: LuxArchival, UART, and Fisher 400. We'll cover those here in a minute. But this one, Pastel Premier, comes in 6 different colors, and the surface seems to accept pastel layers really well, and you can blend it, which is nice. And this paper can take wet underpaintings, but be careful not to use too much alcohol if you're doing an alcohol wash underpainting. Now, LuxArchival. I definitely need to try out this paper soon. It's a great sanded paper that only comes in 1 color, which is white, and 1 grit, which is 400 grit. But the color is a slightly warm white, lighter than the tan colors of UART and Fisher 400 that we're about to look at. But it's similar in feel and texture to both of those papers. It accepts the pastel marks very nicely with a great texture. A lot of professional artists use this surface as well. Now we get to UART. This is probably the second most popular paper among professional artists after pastel mat, and it's used especially by many landscape painters, although you could certainly paint other subject matter on it. This is one of the only sanded surfaces that's available in multiple grits. There are 7 grits available, from a rough 240 grit for extra textured ruggedness to the very fine 800 grit for highly detailed realism. And it comes in 2 colors, a light tan and a black. And now finally we have Fisher 400, currently my preferred surface. It's very similar to UART and LuxArchival in texture and the way that it accepts the pastel. It's currently very difficult to find due to production problems. It accepts layers well, it blends very well. It also works very well with wet underpainting techniques. It only comes in one grit, which is 400, and one color, but again, the color is not an issue for me because you can tone the paper pretty much any color that you want. All right, so again, the surface that you choose is the most important aspect when you're starting out in pastel painting. And I would encourage you to spend some time playing with different surfaces, check out the options, and find one that you really connect with and that works well for the style of painting you want to produce. But of course, these surfaces cost money. And we reviewed 14 different surfaces here, and that would be a lot of money to go and buy all those different surfaces. But fortunately, Dakota Pastels has a sampler pack that you can purchase on their website. I'll put the link in the description. And most of the options we reviewed today came in that pack. So it's a great way to get a feel for some of the options out there and really start to narrow down what you're looking for. But if you don't want to do this, or if this is still confusing, let me give you my top 3 picks for the surfaces that you should try out. Number 1, I think you should try out the Rives BFK. It's not made for pastels, but it could produce some interesting results. So that's the printmaking paper that has some handmade paper texture to it. And some realists use it, but you could also get some really good texture out of it. Second, I would definitely try UART. This is the most popular sanded paper out there. It comes in a variety of grits, but if you go with 400 grit UART, that's kind of right down the middle in terms of smoothness and roughness. And 400 grit UART would be a great place to start. And then finally, get Pastelmat. Pastelmat is used probably by more professional artists than any other, and it's just very multi-purpose. It is a smooth surface, so you can get fine details, but the way that it accepts pastel also lends to those landscapes, to the abstract or impressionist strokes as well. So I think many beginner pastel artists get frustrated and they give up too soon because they're not using the right surface. And when I started out, I made the same mistake. I think I went out and got some drawing paper or a pad of paper from the local hobby store that said it was for pastel, but it's really not. You need a surface that accepts the pastel well. When you make a mark, it leaves a mark. And you want a surface that will hold the pastel so it just doesn't fall off. And these surfaces that we reviewed today all can do that if you use them in the right way. So go buy that sampler pack or go buy a few sheets of Pastelmat and UART and start experimenting and see what you can produce. But no matter what, just go make something.